Our reading today comes from Matthew 20, chapter 20, verses 20 to 34, and I will be reading from the King James Version. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and, kneeling down, asked a favor of him. "What is it you want?" he asked. She said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." "You don't know what you are asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup I am going to drink?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." Jesus stopped and called them. "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him.
Thank you. I was a little panicked because I had no idea how to help him. I'm Carolyn Clausen. I'm a teacher at the Meeting Place. I was an elder at the time. People come to me because I'm a therapist. There's a high level of trust that I will say the right thing, and I was at a loss for words. It was the spring of 2020, during those first months of the pandemic, when all learning was remote learning for students. Some students flourished, and many didn't. Our son, Jay, was one of those that did not take kindly to that schedule up, show online if you can kind of school. He had always really only gone to school for sports and friends, and as many adolescent boys do. And so there was absolutely no point to school when he did it all at home, and there was neither sports nor friends as part of the deal. The pandemic did hard and dark things for him. He started switching his days and nights, sleeping all day, playing video games all night, ignoring us all the time. We did what we could to pull him out of it. He was miserable, and I didn't know what to do. He knew that he was miserable, but he didn't know what to do either. I'd only been his bonus mom for about 4 years at that point, and I really struggled how much I was allowed to push or cajole or convince or whatever. I did email all his teachers at school, explaining our situation and asking them for help. And we met with some of them online who offered great suggestions and beautiful encouragement, but really nothing changed. One of his courses was an Introduction to Accounting course, and it was always designed to be a correspondence course, and he had gone to Mr. Jansen's office starting in September to do his lessons throughout the year. We had arranged an online meeting with Mr. Jansen to talk about this course as well. But on the last minute, it was a pleasant, still biting spring Friday morning. He changed it from video to our backyard. He cycled over and we sat, socially distanced, on the back deck. We exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes and then got to the important stuff. I could see Jay's chin wobbling a bit. He's a good kid, and he knew he was messing up. He was getting ready to be confronted. There was no good answer to the questions that would be coming. He wasn't doing his work, And now he believed this kind and loved teacher that was right there was about to hold him to account. Mr. Jansen started off this conversation with something like, "So, Jay, are you ever going to be an accountant?" And Jay, startled, stops for a moment because it seemed like some random question, and then he slowly goes, "No." So Mr. Jansen goes, "Well, you got some of the very basics before Christmas and the first 6 weeks after Christmas. We might say that you've learned the absolute essentials. And, well, you're now 12 assignments behind, and there's another 12 assignments to go. So there's, like, that's where we're at." And Jay's chin was really wobbling now. And then he said, "Here's what I propose. Each assignment takes about an hour. 12 behind, 12 ahead, that's 24 hours. Every hour of good that you do for yourself or somebody else counts as a completed assignment. If you walk around the block for 15 minutes, it's a quarter of an assignment. If you empty the dishwasher for 15 minutes, that's another quarter of an assignment. Keep track, and once you have submitted to me that you have done 24 hours of good for yourself or another, you're done the accounting course." That's when my chin started to wobble, because that experience of mercy was profound for Jay. Indeed, for our entire family. Those of you who watch TSN know that there's sort of a turning point moment in a game. That was our TSN turning point moment in our family. It didn't flip everything overnight, but it did start the slow rise out of the pit. After that afternoon, he started looking us in the eye. He joined us for supper. He stayed to load the dishwasher, and we would crack a few jokes with him. It started a change in our Jay, and that changed our entire household. Here's the thing. Even as Jay was not doing his schoolwork, and that was a problem, when we all took a deep breath, we could see that this problem was really more a symptom of a deeper problem. Mr. Jay could see to the bottom of the problem, Mr. Jansen, and it completely changed how he handled it. He didn't handle the situation following the conventions typical of a teacher. He handled it as a Christ follower with deep compassion for the suffering in front of him. Mr. Jansen seemed to understand that what our Jay needed was mercy. That mercy touched Jay deeply and gave him a way out of a life crisis. The schoolwork was less important than Jay's overall dismal state at that point. Mr. Jansen gave our Jay what he needed, not what he deserved. That's mercy. These last years, as I have been working with various groups, government departments, nonprofit organizations, schools, groups of teachers, etc., online during the pandemic at first, where I spoke to a little green dot on my camera, and then since in hotel meeting rooms and community centers, I have been talking with people about gritty grace, undeserved favor, giving themselves and others, simply being kind without a reason, and then also revolutionary mercy, which is giving themselves and others what they need, not what they deserve. Mercy is, I explained to them, extended when you could punish someone, but instead you reach out to give them what is truly good, giving the person what they need, not what they deserve. Mercy is transformative. I've told the story of Jay and Mr. Jansen, and I have permission from my son Jay to tell the story to all sorts of groups in the marketplace, and they eat it up. It was like folks had never heard about mercy and they craved it. They grabbed it and they squeezed it. Now they had language and the concept of what it was that they could do in their household and in their work teams to change downward spirals. First of all, that so many of us fell into during times of the pandemic lockdowns. But let's face it, we are still very prone to those moments now. I'm delighted to be here with you today to talk about one of the Beatitudes. And I'm not sure if a person is allowed to have a favorite Beatitude, but if we are, this is mine. Matthew 5, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. We're going to look at Jesus and the way he encountered people. Here in Matthew 5 or 7, he talks about mercy in the Beatitudes, but he lived mercy with the people as he lived and breathed and spent time with them. You've heard the text from Matthew 20 already, and we're going to look closer at it, but we're going to back up a bit to the previous chapter to understand this story first a little better. Chapter 19 has stories of people making assumptions about Jesus and being disappointed by his reactions and responses. Rather than follow their program, he instead encourages people to make the world kinder and gentler for those who weren't typically valued, like women and children. And he encourages people to focus on relationship rather than stuff. And they are not getting it. Let me run through these. The first 9 verses are about questions that the Pharisees have about divorce. They are trying to catch Jesus in this sort of gotcha moment. He responds in a way that gives dignity and worth to wives, to women who are often thrown away in that culture without regard to how they would survive. He advocates for women here as he speaks against men divorcing women for whatever trivial reasons they might have, as could happen in that time. And then in verse 13-14, the next story is the story of Jesus welcoming the children and rebuking the disciples who wanted him to do more important things than spend time with kids. Jesus celebrates and connects with these kids. He enjoys them. He blesses them. He brings them in while others want to push them away. The third story is that of the rich young ruler who says he follows all the rules, tick, 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 the checkbox, and asks, or at least hopes, that that will be enough. And Jesus ups the cost of discipleship and lets him know that he needs a total lifestyle change that makes the lives of the poor better. It's really inconvenient when Jesus consistently invites people from their own comfort to being in close relationship with people who others push aside. People don't get what Jesus is talking about. He confuses some, and he enrages others. He lives a lifestyle of giving people what they need, not what the rules of that day say they deserve. This approach of mercy drives some people so angry they actually want him dead. Then in chapter 20, where our text today was read from, the first chunk of that chapter is the parable of the worker in the vineyard. The laborers, no matter what time they start in the day, get what they need, not what they deserve. They need enough to buy that day's food. And so they get enough to buy that day's food. They get a day's pay. That story ends with a line, so the last will be first, and the first will be last. There's a short chunk about Jesus letting them know of his impending death because it's real and it's coming. And then we get to the story where it was already read this morning. The mother of James and John steps in and asks for her grown-up children, her grown-up sons who are right there. Talk about a helicopter mother. I want them right on either side of you in your kingdom. And get this, the other disciples, they are not upset about this question that is so out of step with all the ways they have watched Jesus live in this upside-down kingdom. No. They are upset in a jealous way. How dare you ask for something that the rest of us have just as much right to? There's this sort of, why are you trying to ice us out of these positions kind of attitude. And Jesus, I can almost imagine getting a little exasperated by this point, essentially says, you guys seriously don't get what I'm about. Because if you really knew, you wouldn't think that being right beside me are such important positions of privilege. A week later, he's on the cross, and the people on either side are dying along with them. And besides, being all important isn't really all that important. He says, instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be the first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. The disciples do not get it. They are blind to what Jesus is about. They are blind to what Jesus is saying. They are blind to his message. Now let's look closer at the story of the blind men. Verse 29. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. Now he's leaving Jericho on the 18-mile walk to Jerusalem. and they are leaving from Jericho to go to Jerusalem to start Holy Week, the week before Christ's death. But the road is also a half-mile incline on the way. The distance is a hard slog uphill, but for Jesus, the trek is even more of a challenge in more ways than one, because the very next story in Matthew is the story of Palm Sunday, the beginning of Holy Week. It is at the end of that week that he dies. He has predicted his death, and now he is walking towards that. Keep that in mind as we continue this story. He is heading into torture and death, and he is so merciful with the people in front of him, even as he has that at the back of his mind. Verse 30, 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside. Now let me just stop here and note that blindness was considered a punishment, a curse in that day. In John 9, verse 1, the text says, "As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?'" Blindness was actually quite common in that day. There were no antibiotics to treat eye infections, and it meant that a lot of people became blind. Blindness, of course, would have been perceived as a curse because blind people couldn't work. They were destined to beg, and so therefore, at the bottom of the social order. They were hardly considered people. They were some of the lasts that Jesus talked about who were in position to become first. So verse 30 continued, "When they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, 'Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us.'" So this is amazing. They address Jesus as the Son of David, and that's a name that is only given to Messiah. The disciples still didn't get what Jesus was about. The disciples didn't get it, but these blind folks, they understood that Jesus was the Messiah. Verse 31, "The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, 'Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us.'" I want you to note here, the crowd rebuked them, shh, shh, and minimized them like they did with the children in the previous chapter, essentially saying, "You're not important to Jesus. Don't bother him. Shh." What I want you to notice is this. Their pain was so great, and their desire for healing was so large, they didn't listen. Nope. They got more annoying. They got louder. And let's know something about human nature here. People in pain long for healing, and they will make noise to let you know that they are suffering. That noise can be inconvenient. It's a hassle. It's a pain. It can look like yelling or aggression. What if we heard all of that rather as a cry for mercy? Think about it. The kids in the classroom that act out. The teen who is experimenting with drugs. The man on the street who yells at you. The guy in traffic who cuts you off. It's uncomfortable for us to watch, and a pain in the neck for those of us in the crowd who just want to go about and live our merry lives. We cringe. We want them to settle down and be quiet. But these folks are struggling and they need healing. And they do the opposite. They get louder. What if we, like Jesus, saw that those who are loud and attention-seeking and troublesome, not as people who are noisy and inappropriate, but rather are folks who need mercy? Verse 32, Jesus stopped and called them, "What do you want me to do for you?" I love this. This is my favorite part of that whole story, because the answer seems obvious, and later on we find it is, but Jesus doesn't make assumptions. He stops. On this way to his death, he stops. He stops on the hard journey up to Jerusalem, and with the crowd trying to push these guys away, he pays attention to them. He notices them. That's already its own mercy, isn't it? Jesus doesn't assume that he knows what they want. He gives them the dignity of choice, and he invites them to voice their request. Again, he honors them with his mercy in the act of giving them agency. There's deep respect there. He respects them as people who get to choose rather than just giving them what he assumes and thinks they want. Verse 33, Lord, they answer, we want our sight. They want to see. Of course they do. They weren't like the rich man who wanted stuff. They weren't like the sons of Zebedee who wanted prestige and honor. They wanted healing and wholeness. They want to see. Verse 34, Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed them. Jesus responded to their pleas for mercy. He healed them by touching them, which is a really powerful thing in a society that when you outcast somebody, you do not touch them because they're unclean and you don't want to have anything to do with that level of unclean. These men were outcasts and marginalized, are so close to Jesus. They are so close that he can and he does touch them. Before they can yet see, while they are still in that unwholesome, unhealthy place, Jesus gets right up close and blesses them with his touch. And then they see. Once they see, they follow him. And their choice is, right after healing, to go along. Of all the possibilities now open to them with their vision, job, see family, go traveling and see the sights, they choose to follow Jesus. I want you to notice some of the parallels between this story and the one immediately before it, with the disciples wanting to be on his right and left. So there's 2 blind men versus 2 disciples. And Jesus asks the disciples via the mom, what do you want? He asks the blind men, what do you want? James and John's mom says, grant that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. And the blind guys, they ask for mercy. They just want healing. The blind men receive sight. The disciples are blinder than ever. All 12 disciples got Jesus explaining all over again unsuccessfully. Instead, whoever wants to become great amongst you must be your servant, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. I don't think it's coincidence that this request for humble mercy by the blind man is right after this story where the disciples are jockeying for power. This is important. When we struggle and feel on the edges and feel powerless and ask for mercy, that's when we truly have sight. That's when we see. When we struggle and we ask for healing and mercy, that's when we can see. There's a vulnerability in the blind men that Jesus recognizes is authentic. The huff-puffery of the disciples, where they see themselves all put together, they're front-of-the-line guys, they're Jesus' right-hand man, they did not have that authenticity, and that created their own blindness. These blind guys were in a position to be able to see in a way the disciples could not. Helen Keller, a woman born blind and deaf, said, better to be blind and see with your heart than have 2 good eyes and see nothing. It's mercy that we seek. It's mercy that we are called to extend. And it is in extending mercy that we receive mercy. The Beatitude says, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. But I don't think it's like a gumball machine. I put mercy into others and I will receive mercy from God. It's not transactional like this. Put something in and get that out. In the alchemy of redemption, it's so much more beautiful than that. As you extend mercy, one becomes more merciful, gentler, kinder, more loving. As one marinates in mercy, mercy abounds, and the giver becomes the receiver. Our task today is to truly, truly see that. Father Gregory Boyle, who runs Homeboy Ministries, he writes the book Tattoos on the Heart. I love that book. The largest gang recovery ministry in the world in Los Angeles. He's a Jesuit priest. He suggests that mercy is bigger and more complete than forgiveness. He says, forgiveness waits. It hangs back waiting for somebody to come and apologize. He says, we settle for forgiveness when we should hold out for mercy. As I've been thinking about this, that line, I remember my cousin, a teacher. He was starting at a new school. And he told me how, on the first day, he sat at the back of the classroom with a guidance counselor. After the class was over and the students left, the guidance counselor started to point to some of the empty desks where the kids had been sitting. That boy that sat over there, his house is a drug house, and it's so noisy and chaotic that sometimes when he comes to school, he's hardly slept and he's exhausted. He may fall asleep in class. That girl that sat over there, sometimes her mom doesn't come home all night and isn't there in the morning. She may miss school, but it's because she's staying home with her little sister. And the counselor went on about this student that sat at this desk and that student that sat at that one. And by the end, my cousin understood. When these students slept in class or skipped school, forgiveness would not be required because it was already swapped out for mercy. My cousin admired these students for the way they carried their burdens rather than stand in judgment of those burdens in the first place. Father Gregory Boyle says, the father in the gospel, the story of the prodigal son, he runs to his son while he is still a long way off. Find me anywhere in that story, he says, where the father forgives his son. He doesn't. He doesn't settle for forgiveness. He rushes to mercy. He just says, you're here. Forgiveness looks at the man who has cut you off in traffic and asks, can I remember the generosity of God who forgave me to find a way to let go of how this driver was so rude to me? And that's not a bad thought process. That's a good one. But mercy looks at that same man in the same moment with compassion and generosity and contemplates, I wonder what sort of world this man has lived in that it is necessary for him to change lanes so abruptly in front of me. Maybe he just got fired. Maybe he's rushing to hospital to visit someone who just is in emergency. Maybe he was raised in an environment where he didn't himself receive or experience respect. And in his bones, he doesn't know what that looks like. Mercy doesn't need to forgive him. It just holds space for compassion. Matthew 5, verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Mercy is a big deal. Once again, let me go to Father Gregory, who says, Scripture scholars contend that the original language of the Beatitudes should not be rendered as blessed are the merciful. Greater precision in the translation would say, you are in the right place if. The Beatitudes is not a spirituality after all. It's a geography. It tells us where to stand. The Beatitudes is not a spirituality after all. It's a geography. It tells us where to stand. And where to stand? With the folks at the margins, the ones that no one sees, the ones that are blind and ask for mercy, sometimes persistently in a very annoying, far too loud, even inappropriate sort of way. Jesus invites us to really see, to see him, and to see our own need for mercy, and to see our call to extend mercy in a way that is beautiful. When we marinate in the mercy of God, when we truly soak in the compassionate goodness of it, we have an opportunity to see things differently. Generosity is possible, and mercy becomes an option. I want you to listen to a story that Father Gregory Boyle tells. He runs a mission in downtown Los Angeles, and he works with homeless people, gang members, so forth. There was homeless that were sleeping in his church during the week. And he writes, once the homeless began to sleep in the church at night, there was always the faintest evidence that they had. Come Sunday morning, we'd foo-foo the place as best as we could. We would sprinkle I love my carpet on the rugs, and we would vacuum like crazy. We strategically placed potpourri and airwick around the church to combat this lingering, pervasive reminder that nearly 50 and later up to 100 men had spent the night there. Well, the only time we used incense at Dolores Mission was on Sunday morning before the 7:30 a.m. Mass crowd would arrive. Still, try as we might, the smell remained. The grumbling set in, and people spoke of churching elsewhere. The smell was never overwhelming, just undeniably there. The Jesuits figured out that if we can't fix it, we'll feature it. So we determined to address the discontent in our homilies one Sunday. Homilies, their sermons, were often dialogic, conversational back and forth between the priest and the congregants in those days. So one day, Father Gregory began with, "What's the church smell like?" And people are mortified. Eye contact ceases. Women are searching inside their purses for they know not what. "Come on now," he says. I throw back at them, "What's the church smell like?" Huela a patas. Smells like feet. Don Raphael booms out. He was old and never cared what other people thought. "Excellent," he says, "but why does it smell like feet?" The priest asks. "'Cause many homeless men slept here last night," says a woman. "Well, why do we let that happen?" In Spanish, he says, "It's what we've committed to do," says another. "Well, why would anyone commit to do that?" In Spanish again, "It's what Jesus would do." "Well then, what's the church smell like now?" A man stands and bellows, "It smells like commitment." The place cheers. Guadalupe raises her arms wildly, "Smells like roses." The packed church roars with laughter and a new kinship that embraced someone else's odor as their own. The stink in the church hadn't changed, only how folks saw it. That's mercy. Lord Jesus, have mercy on us. C.H. Spurgeon says, "God's mercy is so great that you may sooner drain the sea of its water or deprive the sun of its light or make space too narrow than diminish the great mercy of God." Would you pray with me? God, I want to thank you that we are people that can marinate in your mercy, that we feel it, and may we live forward as people who are covered in your mercy, and that may that change every moment of every day. As people who have received it, it then becomes so easy to extend it. Thank you, Lord, for your mercy. Amen.